In 1980, I was a young 21-year-old man living in Bozeman, Montana, as an exchange student, Montana State University. During that spring, instead of returning home to Boston, Massachusetts for spring break, I craved a different adventure, one that could ignite the fire of exploration burning within me. I didn't want to return to the crowded city with its bustling streets, where everything had become too familiar. I needed something new, an unfamiliar place to challenge my own limits. And as fate would have it, I found the opportunity I had been longing for. The man I met, an experienced mountaineer, had just completed his ice climbing certification and had been certified as a lead climber. He was looking for a companion for a 10-day trip to Mount Assiniboine, a beautiful and wild region in British Columbia. Our task was simple, but also challenging. We would ski with over 30 kilograms backpacks, camp in snow caves, explore a few remote cabins, and eventually return after a one-day ice climbing expedition. For me, this was the perfect opportunity to test my skills and spirit. The day we began our journey, I vividly remember the biting cold of Canada surrounding me as we parked our car at Icefields Parkway, a long road that runs along the Saskatchewan River. The scenery around us was breathtaking, with snow-covered mountains and a clear blue sky. We left the car, prepared our gear, and began stepping into the adventure. Others had started before us. About 12 climbers were there that day, divided into 6 teams, and we were the last team. There was no rush. We enjoyed the spectacular scenery as we took each step up the mountain. At the summit, when we stopped to look back at the path we had taken, the sun had begun to set behind the distant mountains. The sky was ablaze with a brilliant red sunset, creating a magnificent scene that I had never witnessed before in my life. But that beauty didn't last long. We quickly realized that the temperature had begun to drop sharply, about 30 degrees in just a short while. Piercing cold quickly seeped into our skin, and before long, both of us started shivering uncontrollably. We sat on a small ledge, watching the other climbing groups gradually leave. Every step they took away seemed to push us further into isolation. The other teams, as they looked at us, likely thought we were crazy for staying on the mountain while the cold was rapidly enveloping everything. But we didn't have many options. Now, with only the 2 of us left on the mountain, we realized that we were in real trouble. The cold began to take over our bodies, and within just a few minutes, I clearly felt the signs of hypothermia. My muscles contracted violently, with different groups of muscles seemingly twitching independently. My jaw kept clattering, and my entire body shuddered violently. It wasn't an ordinary shiver. It felt like a seizure, where all my muscles were working at once, trying to keep me warm, but in vain. I tried to take deep breaths, but the freezing air made each breath difficult. What should we do? I asked my companion, struggling to control my breathing. We both understood that this situation could be life-threatening. We had no food, no water, and our energy was rapidly depleting. We considered setting up a tent and trying to survive the night here, but even as that thought crossed our minds, we knew that the chances of survival were slim. Staying calm was key. Both of us tried not to panic, keeping as clear-headed as possible in this situation. We knew we had to make a decision, either stay here or try to descend in the dark. After a quick discussion, we agreed that we had to attempt the descent, even though we knew it would be a daunting task. That night, we began the descent from the summit, step by step, in the pitch black. There wasn't enough light, and the temperature kept dropping even further. We could clearly feel every step draining our energy. Hypothermia continued to set in, and every small movement made us more exhausted. I remember that at that point, I stopped paying attention to the time. Everything became blurry, and the only thing that mattered was each action I took to keep myself alive. Each small movement, each word spoken, drained the energy that I could not afford to lose. I had no excess fat on my body, and it felt as though my body was consuming itself to stay alive. I began to realize that my body was reaching a state of total exhaustion. At one point, we descended a dark cliff where the faint moonlight helped guide our way. We reached a slope where an iron pin had been fixed into the cliff. Our climbing rope was tied through it, and we began to lower ourselves down. Tim, my companion, went first, followed by me. When we reached the flat surface below, my body was almost completely drained. In front of us was a flat rock surface, about twice the size of a large dining table. It was an ideal resting point, but right next to it was a 500-foot drop. Every step we took had to be extremely careful to avoid slipping. The cold wasn't our only enemy. One careless step could end our lives instantly. We tied ourselves to the cliff to ensure safety. The shivering had stopped because our bodies had passed that stage, and now it was simply a struggle not to stop altogether. I fastened the safety rope to myself and began pulling the climbing rope, hoping to free it so we could continue our descent. Unfortunately, the rope got stuck in a crevice somewhere, preventing me from pulling it free. I tried shaking the rope, but all I got in return was stiffness and frustration. My frozen hands and feet, encased in climbing boots, made it impossible to climb back up and check the rope. Meanwhile, I felt my ability to think clearly slipping away, my mind becoming foggy from the cold. Cold gradually took over my mind, leaving me no longer as alert as I realized I was making poor decisions, but I didn't have the strength to change them. I tried pulling the rope again, but it was futile. Tim stood next to me, both of us nearly at the end of our endurance. I clearly felt that we were standing on the edge of death. As the cold gradually took over my mind and all efforts of survival vanished, I felt a strange sense of peace that I had never experienced before. All worries, fears, and even feelings of despair disappeared. Instead, there was a profound acceptance of the current situation, that I would not escape this mountain. Death had come closer than ever, and I no longer feared it. Looking up at the night sky, I saw countless shimmering stars, each with different colors and sizes, creating a magnificent scene beyond words. That night, the sky was like a brilliant canvas, illuminating the snow-covered mountains below. I could hear the sound of the Saskatchewan River flowing gently throughout the night. Though the cold was still invading my body, some part of me felt detached from reality. Each time I tried to pull the climbing rope, an overwhelming drowsiness would suddenly hit me. It wasn't an ordinary kind of drowsiness. It was a sudden loss of consciousness, as if a black curtain had instantly fallen, pulling me into a state of unconsciousness. I fell to the cold, hard ground, hitting my shoulder and head hard, making my helmet crack with a dry sound. But instead of feeling pain, I awoke with a strange sensation. I was still alive, yet the drowsiness returned, and once again, fell. Each time I woke up, I tried to stand and continue pulling the rope, but the effort only made me more exhausted, and the drowsiness returned faster each time. Finally, after one fall, I felt my vision change. What I saw began to narrow, as if my sight was being surrounded by a black circle. This circle grew smaller and smaller until I could only see a single point on the mountain before everything disappeared completely. But instead of falling asleep, I realized I was no longer there. I didn't feel any pain, no coldness. Instead, there was a light, weightless sensation. I began to wonder, where am I? What is this? In front of me, the Rocky Mountain wall slowly faded away, revealing an infinite void, a dark space that seemed to have no end. As I gazed deeply into this void, a tiny dot of light appeared far away, as if it was hundreds of billions of light-years distant. Though small, that light seemed to illuminate the entire surrounding darkness. And before I realized what was happening, the light shot toward me at an unimaginable speed. The light wasn't just a physical beam of light. There were no words to describe it, but I understood that it was a being communicating with me without using language. It told me, "I have come to take you." But I wasn't ready. There was resistance within me, a will to fight against death, and I tried to raise a mental barrier, prevent the light from approaching. But all my efforts were in vain. The light penetrated all barriers and enveloped me. As the light engulfed me, I felt an immense sense of safety, warmth, and comfort that I had never experienced before. I realized that this being was not a stranger. This was the same entity I had encountered in my childhood dreams. It wasn't a specific form, but rather a giant ball of light, surrounding me with infinite intelligence and love. It didn't need to speak, but I understood that this was a divine being, something that could be called an angel, or perhaps even God. I was no longer myself. My body was no longer physical, but had become a form of light, an energy in the shape of a human, no longer bound by physical limitations. I felt myself floating in a weightless space. Inside this being, I felt love, protection, and immense strength. It gave me comfort, a sense of welcome, and infinite wisdom. From inside this entity, I looked outward and saw that we were moving. Not like moving on the ground, but gliding through a different kind of space, as if passing through a tunnel of light. I no longer saw myself as a single entity, felt that I was both part of this being, experiencing everything from within, and at the same time, observing myself from the outside. It was a multidimensional experience, one that no language could adequately describe. We continued to move through the infinite space until a new light. This light was bigger and brighter than anything I had ever seen. It wasn't just a simple light, it was a massive flow of energy that encompassed everything. Every color I had ever seen in the night sky existed within this light, but at a higher level, millions of colors that I couldn't describe in words. This light was alluring, calling out to me, and I couldn't resist. I was drawn toward it, and as I got closer, I could see that it wasn't just a surface, but had depth, a kind of transparent light that I could see through. It was as if it was both material and immaterial at the same time. I dove deep into this light, and as I went further in, it began to show me my own self. I saw my life, not as though I were watching a movie, but as if I were reliving each moment of my life, especially the moments when I had caused suffering to others. I felt the pain that I had inflicted on people from their perspective. Every emotion, every bit of sorrow I had caused came back to me. What was even more astonishing was that I didn't just look back at the past as an outsider. I felt every pain, every injustice I had caused. The actions that I thought were small, the moments of anger, jealousy, all became much larger than I had ever imagined. I judged myself and realized that the small reasons I had for hurting others were not worth the immense pain I had caused. At the same time, the light showed me unconditional love, a love without boundaries, without limits. It didn't judge me but simply loved and forgave. I felt as though I were being purified in this light, with all my mistakes and sins burned away, leaving behind the purest version of myself. As I was drawn into the flow of this light, I was no longer a physical being. I became part of the universe, part of the infinite energy flow. I felt the connection between myself and everything around me, from the smallest particles in the universe to the distant stars. Everything was interconnected in an invisible web, and I was part of it. I stood there, floating in infinite space, gazing at the vast flow of light, feeling smaller than I had ever felt before. But in that smallness, I didn't feel powerless. On the contrary, I realized that I was a part of something much greater, something beyond the imagination of the human mind. This light wasn't just light, it carried life, intelligence, and a strength beyond words. I was still standing before my choice, to stay in this eternal peace, or to return to the physical body where I knew pain and challenges awaited. But just as I began to ponder that, I felt a presence stronger than ever before. This divine being, this light, wasn't just an external presence. It seeped into every part of my being, It enveloped me, permeating every cell of light within me. Something strange but profound happened. This being began to talk to me. There were no words, no language, but its message reached me more swiftly and clearly than any conversation I had ever had. It didn't need to use words, because all information, all feelings, all meanings were transmitted directly into my mind, like a kind of data that I could understand naturally without analysis. Are you ready? That was the first message I received. Ready for what? I wasn't sure, but the peace that this being brought made me no longer fear the future. I began to understand that this being wasn't a stranger to me. It was a presence I had felt in my childhood, peering in dreams that I never fully understood. This being wasn't unfamiliar. In fact, it was very familiar, as if I had known it for a long time, but was only now able to truly face it. And then it showed me the unimaginable. This being, which I called an angel, or perhaps even God, began to reveal every aspect of life that I had never perceived before. It didn't just show me myself, it opened the door for me to see others, all the souls around me. I wasn't just an isolated individual, part of a vast network connecting all living beings. Every soul, every person on earth, is connected by a thin but powerful thread, the thread of love and life. I saw my life from a completely new perspective. Every moment I had lived, every decision I had made, was laid bare before me. But instead of only seeing everything from my own point of view, I was given the ability to experience them from the perspectives of others. I felt the pain, joy, and despair I had brought to others in my life. The actions that I thought were small, the careless words, all left deeper imprints than I had ever imagined. I was shown that every action has consequences. Every word, every gesture, every thought had an impact on the lives of others, and I began to understand that I had caused significant suffering to others, sometimes for very small and selfish reasons. This wasn't meant to punish me, to help me understand that every action carries weight, and that nothing happens without leaving a trace. I felt the pain of those I had hurt, and I also felt their forgiveness, their understanding. Everyone makes mistakes, and in this space, nothing was judged. There was only forgiveness, only unconditional love. After going through those painful moments, I felt cleansed. All the burdens, the guilt I had carried, seemed to melt away in this divine light. I no longer felt guilt. Instead, I felt a release, lightness that I had never experienced before. Then, this being showed me the essence of love. It wasn't the kind of love I had known on earth. This was a form of unconditional love. A love that embraced everything, without limits, without conditions. This love didn't demand, didn't expect, simply existed. I understood that love is the fundamental principle of the universe, the thread that connects all life. Finally, I was shown a scene that I will never forget. I was brought back into the universe, but this time I didn't see stars or planets as before. Instead, I saw billions and billions of souls, each one a small point of light in the darkness. They were all connected to one another, all part of a greater being that I had only begun to understand. Everyone returns home. That was the final message I received from the light. Everyone, no matter what they had done in life, would return to their origin, would be welcomed with unconditional love. There was no judgment, no punishment, only forgiveness and love. Then, this being gave me the final choice. You can stay here in eternal peace, or return to your life. I understood that if I chose to stay, all pain, all challenges in life would disappear. I would be absorbed into the infinite flow of love and light. But if I chose to return, I would have to face the physical world, with its difficulty, with the pain that I knew still awaited me. I hesitated. A large part of me wanted to stay, to dissolve into this peace. But another part of me, a small but strong part, still wanted to return. I thought about the people I loved, about my family, about the things I had yet to accomplish in life. I knew that if I chose to stay, I would never have the chance to do those things. In the end, I made my decision. I chose to return. You have chosen. The light said, and immediately I felt movement. I was no longer floating in infinite space, but was gradually returning to my body. The body I had left now felt like a tight cage, a confined space that I had to force myself back into. I felt pain as soon as I returned to my physical body. All the pain I had forgotten came rushing back, stronger than ever. My body was freezing cold. Every joint felt as if it were frozen. But the worst feeling was being trapped inside this body. I had experienced absolute freedom, and now I was imprisoned again within the limits of physical form. I felt like I was being forced into a mold too small for me. Every part of my body hurt as it slowly came back to life. I could hear Tim's shouts, my companion, as he struggled to pull me back to reality. He was crying, screaming, trying to wake me up. I opened my eyes and saw Tim's worried face. He was pulling me up from the cliff, tears streaming down his face. I felt myself being pulled up, but my mind was still spinning from what I had experienced. Where had I been? What had I seen? Had I really died, or was it all just a dream? My body returned to reality, but my mind was still elsewhere, in a distant place that I knew I would never forget. When I opened my eyes, I felt an unreal sensation. The world around me no longer seemed the same. Everything appeared blurry, almost two-dimensional. I saw Tim's face, but it no longer looked real. He was crying, shouting, but his voice echoed distantly, faint and hard to recognize. Felt as if I were standing between two worlds. The physical world I had just returned to, and another world where I had experienced absolute peace. My body was still in pain, but my mind seemed to have completely transformed. My emotions, my thoughts were no longer the same as before. The earth, my physical body, and everything around me now seemed like faint images, lacking the depth and vibrancy I had seen before I embarked on my near-death journey. Tim was still pulling me up from the cliff. I tried to grab the climbing rope, trying to assist him. My body felt heavy and difficult to move. When I finally stood on the rocky ground, I realized that I had returned. I was no longer the same person. Everything I once knew, once believed in, now seemed unimportant. This world, with all its complexities and struggles, felt foreign to me. After Tim helped secure the climbing rope, we began descending the cliff slowly. The cold still enveloped us, but I no longer felt it as sharply as before. Instead, I was absorbed in thoughts about what I had experienced. I knew that I had encountered a great being, a divine entity. There was no doubt about that anymore. But I wasn't sure if I could share this experience with anyone else. Who would believe me? Who would understand what I had just gone through? When we finally reached the base of the mountain and set up camp in our small tent, Tim and I sat together in silence. Tim was still trembling from the cold, but in his eyes I saw fear and worry. He had thought that I had died. Throughout the descent, he repeatedly checked to see if I was still alive, but I had changed and Tim could sense it. "I thought you were gone," Tim said, his voice shaky. "I thought I had lost you." I didn't know how to respond. I had died. I had left my body, but I had returned. No words could fully describe this experience. I wasn't sure if I could explain it in a way that made sense. "It's okay. I'm fine," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I was truly fine. That night, we sat in silence. Tim tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept staring into the void outside the tent, thinking about what I had seen, what I had experienced. My mind was filled with questions. Was this real? Had I really died? Had I met God? The next morning we packed up the tent and prepared for the journey back. Everything moved slowly. Nothing was the same as before. When I looked at the majestic mountains before me, I no longer felt overwhelmed by their beauty as I had before. To me, they now seemed like a small part of the vast universe I had experienced. Upon returning home after the mountain expedition, I tried to resume my normal life, but it wasn't easy. Everything seemed so mundane compared to what I had been through. Daily tasks, relationships, all became dull and meaningless. I felt like a lost soul, no longer belonging to this world. I began spending a lot of time reflecting on my experience. Long nights, I would lie in bed, close my eyes, and try to recall every detail of that near-death journey. I remembered the radiant light, unconditional love I had felt. I longed to return to that place, but I knew I couldn't. Profound change had taken place within me. I used to chase material goals, personal successes, but now I no longer cared about those. My life started to revolve around seeking deeper meaning, connection to the spiritual reality I had experienced. I spent a lot of time meditating, reading books on spirituality and philosophy. Every time I closed my eyes, I tried to recapture the sense of peace I had felt in that divine presence. But life doesn't stop. Family, friends, and society didn't understand the change in me. They couldn't comprehend why I had become different, why I no longer cared about the things they deemed important. Conversations with them became more difficult, as I realized I couldn't share my experience. They would never understand, and that made me feel lonely. I remember one evening, sitting by the fire with a close friend. He asked me about the mountain trip, and I tried to explain everything in the simplest way possible. But as soon as I started talking about the light, about the being I had met, he burst out laughing, thinking I was joking. That was when I realized I would never be able to fully share this story with anyone. Time passed, and I continued living my life, but with a completely different perspective. Whenever I faced challenges or pain, I remembered what the being of light had taught me: unconditional love and forgiveness. I realized that everyone, no matter who they were, carried a part of that light within them, and that we are all connected by an invisible thread. This helped me overcome difficulties in life, and instead of judging others, I learned to accept and love them unconditionally. Though I no longer experienced the absolute peace I had felt in the presence of the light, part of me still held on to the memory of it. I always remembered that this world is only temporary, that we all will eventually return to our origin, to the divine being I had encountered. In the end, I realized that I no longer needed to search for anything. The peace and love I had once felt were always within me, as long as I listened and felt it. All I needed to do was live this life with love, forgiveness, and acceptance. Everything else would fall into place when the time was right.